This is the second day of our module, and to not going any more further, we will first hear a lecture, a very interesting one of Erik Swyngedouw, Climate Change Politics as Post-Political Populism. Very interesting subject, very provocative. So Erik, please.
Thank you very much. I shall try to get going in a simple sort of way, hoping that the projector will come to show you the more complicated things. I am Erik Swyngedouw, and I'm a political ecologist. That's what I do. I'm an academic, and I do the political ecology in its precise words. I'm interested in the political, not in policies or politics as an everyday sort of practice. That's something else. I leave that to environmental managers and policymakers. I'm interested in the political, A. I'm interested in the ecological, the physical material substratum of life, 2. And 3, I'm interested in power. How the political ecological configurations is choreographed, animated by, as we all know, uneven, unequal power configurations. We know that. And my concern is, and that is, I think, something we all share, is how can that be changed? Small ways, big ways, but change. And I would insist that it is the political which is the arena of change. Not a social, not a personal, not a cultural, not science, not love, not art. The political is the domain of change. So until I'm 60 years old, so I've been around for a while, 62 in fact. In the 1970s, when I was about your age, we said, everything is political. Remember the slogan? Everything is political. So what I do in the garage at the time, and my partner did in the kitchen at the time, we've swapped these things in the meantime, right? And what we together were doing in the bedroom was considered to be the political. Today I'd argue that's bullshit. That's bullshit. Not that it doesn't matter what we do in the garage, the kitchen, or the bedroom. It matters immensely. But it should not be elevated to the dignity of the political. You should not confuse that. So that by means of introduction. What I want to talk about is climate change discourse, climate change policies as populist. And this is quite a statement, of course, and I'm not going to argue that everyone who talks or acts on climate mobilizes a populist discourse of practice. That would be untrue. What I am arguing is that the hegemonic way in which climate has been elevated to the dignity of a global humanitarian concern, both by the cosmopolitan elites, our enemies, Al Gore, Bill Gates, are as worried about climate change as you and I are, that the hegemonic discourse and practice has many populist foundations. Populist foundations that are very similar, not identical, very similar to the populist discourses and practices of the Trumps and the Orbans, or big enemies, right? Because today, climate change is indeed consensually accepted as a main concern. It's hegemonic. Those who disagree with us, like Trump, like the climate change deniers, like Orban, are relegated to the margin of intellectual, political, and scientific respectability. In other words, we call them stupid, correctly so. Right? So I want to start off with a paradox. And the paradox goes more or less as follows. The environmental argument and climate change as the canonical illustration of that is highly debated, despite the agreement that it matters. It's contentious in all manner of ways. Different people, groups, positions argue all the time. It is massively disputed. And then we say, it's because of that dispute that it is political. I think we should think about that for a moment. Whether the disputes we have over what this thing is and what to do with it, whether that constitutes a political dispute. I don't think it does. A. B. At the same time, many of us argue that we're living in depoliticizing times. That many people have lost any interest, belief that things can be done, which accounts to a certain way for the appeal of illiberal, nationalist, xenophobic movements. We live in a time of depoliticization, animated by these populist discourses, which we say, oh, but that's not us, we are too smart for that. That is what I want to interrogate. We are partly to blame. So I want to do a reflexive talk. I rarely talk to the elites because I'm not going to convince them. And I don't give a fuck about what they do. I can't change them. My argument is not going to change them. My science is not going to change them. My activism is not going to change them. I don't give a toss what Trump does or what Elon Musk does with his hybrid cars. I don't care. And he doesn't care about me. It's a mutual sort of not caring. But I do care about political ecology and power, the kind of things that brings us together in a place like that. As is often the case, it's not us intellectuals, and that's what we are. Let's not fool ourselves. Let's not fool ourselves. We spend most of our lives, you and I, talking, reading, writing. Yeah, that's what we do. We're intellectuals. We should take that seriously because we don't do anything else. Who works in a factory? Ha! Who lives in a refugee camp? Ah, there, one. Okay. Welcome. Very often I find the deepest insights not with our types of intellectuals, but with others, equally intellectuals, movie makers, poets, playwrights, novelists. Because they often feel the pulse of what is at stake much better than you and I in our obsessive pursuit of making the world a better place can ever feel. So I want to give a little quote from a novel that I found very, very inspiring myself. It's a novel about climate change. And the title of the novel is Solar. Solar. Anyone read the novel Solar by Ian McEwan? Ian McEwan is arguably the most important living novelist in the UK today. He's written about a dozen fantastic books. One of them is on climate change, called Solar, published in 2010. He wrote the novel after a British philanthropist, you know, these good people who have too much money for their own good and dosh it around for good causes. After a British philanthropist had invited 40 British intellectuals to join him on his yacht to the North Pole to bear witness, to testify. That's what intellectual elites do, right? It's called peer review. You know? It's called peer review. If someone who works in a factory in a refugee camp says climate change is happening, says, who are you? Yeah? Who are you to say that? So you have to bear witness, and the people who do that have to be respectable people. Right? So he, as an outcome of that, wrote a novel. And I think he captured the situation that we're in perfectly. It's a novel, it's a bit of a science fiction novel. The protagonist is a Nobel Prize winning physicist, British physicist, 50-odd years old, a bit overweight, serial womanizer, not a very nice man, but he had discovered the technology that would save us all. Right? His technology, his invention for which he got the Nobel Prize, he actually stole the knowledge from a colleague of his, but it doesn't matter, it's a side thing. The technology permitted on an industrial scale to turn photosynthesis. This is ultimately the source of energy on Earth. It's only one, really. Yeah? Photosynthesis that turns solar radiation into energy. There's gas, coal, oil, you name it, right? Solar panels. Yes. The mechanism, the biochemical mechanism that really does this is biosynthesis, photosynthesis. Yeah? The green leaves, right? You know enough about the biology. Can you imagine if you could replicate that industrially? We could go on doing what we're doing and save the planet. Yes. So, they get going on their massive capitalist venture. The physicist had joined up with a businessman, kind of shady character, as all businessmen are, because mobilizing, assembling a multi-billion-dollar investment project is not easy. You need to have someone who assembles all that money, travels the world, makes the deals. And they finally got it together and were building this massive factory in the south of the US that would give them gigantic accumulation capacities. The ecologists were enthralled. The great transition technology that would save the Earth from overheating. And energy unlimited. Of course, the feasibility or possibility of that venture depended crucially on one thing. On climate change happening. If climate change were not happening, his whole endeavor would go to total waste. So his sidekick businessman had heard the rumor that climate change is not happening. And this is the quote now that follows when the businessman approaches the scientists and says, "If the place is not hotting up, we're fucked." Excuse me, that's from the novel, right? The physicist answers to this concern of his ally, associate. The physicist says, here's the good news. The United Nations estimates that already 1/3 of a million people a year are dying from climate change. Bangladesh is going down. Methane is pouring out of the Siberian permafrost. There is a meltdown under the Greenland ice sheet. 2 years ago, we lost 40% of the Arctic summer ice. The future has arrived, Toby. Toby is the name of his businessman. To which the businessman answers, yeah, I guess. And the scientist answers, Toby, listen, it's a catastrophe, relax. That's what I want to explore. Because that is indeed what is at stake today. And we, our type, not all of us, but many of us, just fall in that trap. So the standard argument about the climate change, the hegemonic one, is nicely captured by a quote that I'm going to read to you. You could see it, but I have to read it to you now. By Prince Charles. Prince Charles. When Prince Charles says something, and I nod because I agree with him, I think, uh-oh, let me open a bottle of wine and think a bit. Yeah? If I intuitively say, oh, that's not too stupid, I better sit down and think. Because Prince Charles and I cannot think the same, otherwise there's something fundamentally wrong with how I think about the world. Now, here is Prince Charles. I quote him from a speech he gave in 2009, March 2009. If we do nothing, the consequences for every person on this earth will be severe and unprecedented, with vast numbers of environmental refugees, social instability, and decimated economies, far worse than anything which we're seeing today, 2009. We have, he says, 100 months left to act. 100 months. That means that today we are 25 months too late. I think we should take that seriously. It is too late. It has already always been too late for those who are being fucked by the socio-ecological configuration. It's only the elites who say it's not too late. Yeah, because what Prince Charles is saying here, which is similar to what Al Gore is saying and so many other environmentalists, disaster is coming. Why do we say that? To hope that we can avoid the arrow of time so that disaster does not happen. It keeps the promise that we can keep on being who we are with the right sort of immediate, urgent revolutionary action. Revolutionary of a particular kind, techno-managerial revolutionary action, so to make sure that nothing really happens other than that we can stabilize the climate. I think we should reverse that and start from the position, it is too late. Actually, it's not entirely true. It's not too late for me or my kind. No, I am doing fine, and my children and siblings too, and will continue to do fine, actually. But for many people, it is too late, has already been too late, and will be too late. So what does happen if we were to start from the fact that for many people on earth, it is already too late, and what that would say about what kind of future we want to make, what kind of politics we need to engage in, from the assumption, from the fact that it is too late. That's what I want to open up. The ultimately point I'm trying to make is that the climate change or the environmental argument discourse, the hegemonic one, is depoliticizing. Yeah? That it eliminates the political as the radical contestation of the future that we want to construct. And that we are guilty of that too, that we are complicit in this tactic of depoliticization. Let me give you a few quotes, not from me, from other people who share in a variety of ways this notion that the elevation of ecology to the dignity of a political concern is depoliticizing. The first quote is from Alain Badiou, French philosopher, who a few years back said, "Let's start by stating that after the rights of man, the rise of the rights of nature is a contemporary form of the opium of the people." You recognize that opium of the people quote, yeah, where it comes from originally, right, and what it was referring to, right? So in a kind of perverse twisting, but you argue that today is not religion, it's ecology. The rights of nature, that form that is the contemporary form of opium of the people. He goes on by saying it's only a slightly camouflaged religion. It is a gigantic operation, I quote, in the depoliticization of subjects. Whew. That's quite something. If he is correct, we really have to think what we do. We really think about what it is what we're doing here. We really have to think about what it is that animates us, that keeps us going, if he's right. Yeah? That's what I want to interrogate. You know? Second quote is from Slavoj Žižek. You know more because he's from the neighboring, country. Replacing the declining religion, he says, ecology, takes over the old religion's fundamental function of having an unquestionable authority that can impose limits. So invoke the unquestionable authority of nature to tell us what to do and what not to do. As if there is an authority in nature. And the third quote is from Ulrich Beck, a great late German sociologist, who said, in the name of indisputable facts, and that has to be, these facts are indisputable, the facts of climate change are indisputable. I'm a scientist too, I'm not a climate skeptic. Too much respect for my physical science colleagues. In the name of indisputable facts, portraying a bleak future for humanity, green politics has succeeded in depoliticizing, his words, depoliticizing political passions to the point of leaving citizens nothing but gloomy asceticism, a terror of violating nature. Should I fly? Shall I buy a new iPhone? Huh? Should I buy it local and organic? A terror of violating nature and an indifference towards the modernization of modernity. These are three quite serious indictments, right? That deserve attention, deserve some serious thought. So before I go on, I want to make it clear what I mean by politicization. We often talk about politics, green, left, radical, liberal politics, right? We often talk about depoliticization and how populist discourse and practices animate, nurture depoliticization. What do you mean? What do we mean by politicization? This elephant in the room, the kind of thing we seem to all agree on but never make explicit as to what constitutes politicization, which we all say we want to see happening. So that revolves for me around the notion of the political. The politicization is about foregrounding the political. And I'm now giving you my view. It doesn't have to be shared by everyone, but my view of what I mean by the political. The political, I would argue, is discernible. So you can see it, although you cannot really identify what it is, but you know it when you see it. You know it when you see it. But it's difficult to define. It's like love. It's like falling in love. Give me a definition of what love is. We would have a very, very hard time doing those. But if you fall in love, you know you're falling in love. Yeah? Yeah. I hope that most of you have experienced that somehow. With the political, it's the same. Yeah? Very difficult to define, but we know it when it's happening. So it's discernible as the interruptive staging of equality. The interruptive staging of equality by what Jacques Rancière calls the part of no part. It's when those who do not count say, I want to count too, in the name of equality. Note, I will not going to use the word justice ever in my talk. I think we should abandon the word justice, climate justice, or whatever justice. I leave the word justice to the elites. I let them worry about justice, because ever since Plato we know that justice is the terrain of those who are empowered to decide what is just or unjust. Very nicely captured when Bush did his Iraq adventure. What was the campaign called? Infinite Justice. Yeah? I think absolutely right. I'm only interested in equality. So the interruptive staging of equality by those who are treated unequally. And that is visible in what Badiou calls an event. Think of historical working class, feminist, so people say, they rise up and say, I want to be treated equally. Full stop. That's the political. It appears when those that are not counted, so think of today of the body of the undocumented immigrant, or in the beginning of the 20th century, the body of woman, yeah? Or in the 18th century, the body of the proletarian, man and woman at the time. Yeah? It appears when those who are not counted within the state of the situation make themselves heard and seen, when they become visible by speaking, by showing, by putting their body in public space. And they do so in the name, in the name of equality. So I just finished a book for those who are interested in going to a bit of propaganda with all neoliberal subjects. After all, the book came out last week. I still don't have any copies of it, but it is on Amazon. So the political is an immanent practice of appearance that interrupts a given order. Hannah Arendt. So it's very different from politics or policy making. Not as any better or worse. That's what it is. As distinct from politics as the act of governing, the rituals, the practices, the agents and actors through which collectively decision making is being achieved. So this is my talk. I'm going to quickly say something about the Anthropocene, which has become, I assume everyone is familiar with the notion of the Anthropocene. Who is not? Okay. So I'll quickly say something because with the climate configuration is closely articulated with this debate over the Anthropocene. Then I'm going to say something about the mechanisms through which, the processes through which climate change has been hegemonized as what psychoanalysts would call the object cause of desire. That means, in simple words, climate change is fucking up all sorts of people, yeah? We don't like that, right? We hate it if the climate fucks up all sorts of people. We would prefer them to be happy and free and democratic and all the rest of it. In order to achieve that, what do we have to do? Deal with CO2. Yeah, deal with the climate. Yeah? That's a fetishistic disavowal, psychoanalysts would say. Yeah? If we deal with carbon, then this suffering and nasty stuff that nature and society combined does to people will not any longer happen. Yeah? It's like falling in love with the shoe of your lover. Yeah? It's fetishistic disavowal. So how has climate change been elevated to the object cause of desire, particularly for our type of people, ecologists, environmentalists, etc. If we deal with the ecological problem, the world will be just fine, etc. Oops. Where am I? Then I'll say something about the condition that we're in today, which many of us have called a post-political, a post-democratic configuration. To then move on to suggest, I mean, most of you are familiar with populism. It's difficult to define, but the sort of standard characteristics, we've all read enough about it to have a sense of what it is. And I'm going to go through the ways in which the climate argument has all manner of populist tendencies. So each time I use the word in that section, CO2, a climate, think of migrants. It's a similar discourse. The discourse that we develop, not all of us, many of us, unfold with respect to climate and CO2 is strictly parallel in terms of structure of the discourse that ethno-nationalists mobilize with respect to migration. So what migration is for ethno-nationalists, climate change is for us. And then I'll conclude with some thoughts for discussion on how to politicize nature. Okay. So you're all familiar with the notion of the Anthropocene. Again, one of those contested terrains, both by scientists who are frantically trying to decide whether the Holocene is over and whether we should scientifically accept the Anthropocene, accepting therefore that humanity has become a deep geological force, shaping deep geological time of the Earth as a whole. The argument is, if we were to accept that, things will change. We will have to change what we do. So we're eagerly awaiting for the scientific verdict on the Anthropocene, so we can then use that as an argument. At the moment, the scientists have made up their mind about whether or not we live in Anthropocene, so that we can use that to say, and now we've got to really change. Yeah? This changes everything, Naomi Klein would say. Yeah. So the Anthropocene is, like climate change, a very good illustration on how what seems to be a dispute, and therefore political, right, in fact is a desperate attempt to find a foundation outside of ourselves in nature so that we legitimize how we should act, politically speaking. Fetishistic disavowal. What it does nonetheless do, I think the Anthropocene is an interesting argument, is that it does confirm that nature does not exist. That humans, or the human and the non-human, are so deeply intertwined that there is no such thing as nature left. Nature is truly dead, is what the Anthropocene argument says. And that therefore the challenge for the future is, what kind of socio-ecological assemblage do we, together with the non-human, want to construct? That's the challenge. And that is what the Anthropocene indeed opens up as a possibility. It confirms the end of nature and affirms the political nature of nature. There is no nature in itself and for itself any longer. We are deeply and irrevocably bound up in it, with our desires, our fights, our power structures, our whatever we do. And of course, in this Anthropocene argument, climate is the quilting point, is the symbolic, the most symbolic of ecological phenomena. Together with biodiversity, pollution, the plastics is now, you know, the big new thing, plastics. And what the Anthropocene climate change argument also does, and something we should really, really take seriously, is the irresistible lure of catastrophe. We love catastrophe. We revel. We find a kind of perverse pleasure each time we see another iceberg with a lot of noise tumbling into the ocean. And say, oh, look at that, we told you! We can't have enough of those images. Yeah, each time I Google, when I have to teach, and I Google images to make my PowerPoints a bit more interesting for young students, I Google climate change, I get horrifying images. Yeah, endlessly. Yeah. And how many times have you reveled in Hollywood ecological catastrophe movies? I can't recall how many times I've seen Los Angeles go down the drain. Earthquakes, epidemics, floods, aliens, you name it. Irresistible lure of catastrophe. But it's a catastrophe that has either already come, as I would argue, or it will never come. It's the never, never land of tomorrow's unfulfilled promises. The end will not come for many. And it's coming for lots of people all the time. So it's this that centers then around what Roberto Esposito called an immunological biopolitics. Difficult word. It basically says what we all share, we activists, as well as the neoliberal ecological modernizers, we want to find a set of dispositives which have to be quite radical. No one denies that, right? In order to stabilize the climate somehow, so that we can go on doing what we're doing. We being hysterical activists and they being ecologically modernizing capitalists. Yeah. My climate change expert colleagues tell me it's too late anyway. The international community's objective to keep global warming below 2, ideally at 1.5 degrees Celsius, not possible. Forget that. Every scientist worth his or her nettle will tell you that 4 degrees, even if you start acting seriously now, which we haven't done yet, greenhouse gases have kept on going up except for 2011. Yeah. 4 degrees is inevitable, and 6 very likely. So it's game over for that. So that's why I would argue, I'm trying to write a book about that, that the Anthropocene is really an Anthropocene. Obscene in the sense that it off-scene, it sets off the scene. That's the notion of obscene. Obscene is that what is set off the stage. Yeah? What cannot be shown, what cannot be said, what is too violent, too sexual, too dangerous. Yeah, that's obscene, off the scene. That Anthropocene climate change argument is an obscene argument. So that's why I prefer to use the word Anthropocene. It will be the title of my next book. Okay. So climate change as an object cause of desire. How did that become constituted over my lifetime, basically? I've been an environmental activist in the 1970s. I grew up in the anti-nuclear energy movement in Belgium. We finally won, sort of. Still a bit uncertain when they're going to close, if they're going to close, etc. But basically, we brought that on the agenda. And I can't remember how often I walked and marched to the fields of Flanders, to Flanders fields, you know, to protest, and German and French fields, you know, to protest against another nuclear thing. I grew up with that stuff, right? And then I became an academic, very happy with that. So in my lifetime, the environment in general and climate in particular has been elevated to consensual concern, shared by most reasonable people, irrespective of their political, cultural, social, and other positionalities. Only the idiots disagree. So that has been consensualized. Has it consensualized to the mobilization of what Mike Davis called ecologies of fear. That if we keep on doing what we're doing, we'll be fucked. The Earth, with its human and non-human inhabitants, will disappear. It will be a catastrophe. And that catastrophic imaginary, which is a very Western sort of imaginary, Christian imaginary, from the horsemen of the apocalypse, repeated in the 17th, 18th century by the Luddites. Yeah? We still have them around. You know, technology is destroying the world. Let's destroy technology and everything will be fine. And we're repeating that yet again under different guises. They're quite common in Western culture. And it's shared both by the academic community. Read IPCC reports. I read them. I believe them. But my hair goes straight up. I get this kind of tickly thing. It's shit, you know. It's really much worse than I thought. And the people are telling me. The scientists are really, really telling me, fuck, it's really bad. Yeah? My colleague in Manchester, Kevin Anderson, who is a very famous international climate scientist, each time I listen to him, he's a very reasonable academic, natural scientist, you know. I freak out, you know. I have to go into the pub and get drunk, you know, otherwise. But others do that too. Al Gore, remember The Inconvenient Truth? This is the wrong title of this document. It should be A Convenient Truth, of course. Now, do you remember when he walked up the ladder? With the greenhouse gas emissions going off the scale? He said, fuck! He's in trouble. But he said, don't worry. If we really want to, we can come up with the technical, institutional, and other means to turn this off. What, of course, Al Gore did not say is what he wanted to achieve. a socially just ecological world order? You may say, yeah, that would be nice. Would he want to have a socially ecologically equal world? Not, of course. He wants to sustain a particular liberal Western order. That's his mission. And he says we have to be revolutionary to do that. He used the revolutionary discourse. No, we really have to be revolutionary. Have you ever seen the movie Il Gattopardo, the leopard, or the novel? Forget about it. El Gattopardo, same story. We have to radically change in order to make sure that nothing changes. One of the protagonists. So we have to change radically to make sure that nothing really changes. That's Al Gore's message, of course. And then our Prince Charles, just, I give you the quote. And we say that too, don't we? Yeah, that's what animates us. Yeah? That's what keeps us coming here in these gatherings. Right? So there is this nurturing of apocalyptic fascinations mobilized in order to work that these apocalyptic conditions will never arise, but will at the same time postponing, really think about happening now and how to act politically so that things really change. It becomes a never, never land of tomorrow's never happening apocalypse. So in this configuration over the past 20, 30 years is that we've moved from uneven and combined catastrophe, because that is what has always happened, socioecologically speaking, at least since the 16th century, in a variety of ways. We know that. I don't want to go through that again. We are familiar. I don't want to hear that again either. We know. To crisis management. We are in a crisis. And no one disagrees with that, in fact. Right? That demands radical institutional, technical transformation, transition. What kind of transition? No one says. To make sure that nothing really changes. That's nicely illustrated by the last IPCC report, where they make a distinction between good climate and bad climate. Yeah, the bad climate is the one that we're in now, and acceleratingly so. Yeah, that's bad. You all agree? Because they don't know what is the good climate. Yeah, what's the good climate? Now, the IPCC has an answer. Yeah? So their vision in the last report, we'll see what they say in the next one, it's coming soon. In the last report is we have to maintain greenhouse gas emissions, the concentration of greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere to the level of 1989. They actually say 1989. So in 1989, the level of greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere was fine. That we can cope with. And many of you were too young in 1989. I wasn't. I was in my 30s in 1989. It was a fucking shit year for lots of people. Hundreds of thousands died of socio-ecological conditions and climatological conditions. So in order now to deal with this climate conundrum that is so dangerously affecting our future, to deal with that became articulated around a particular point de capital, a quilting point. So how do we have to deal with climate? Well, through greenhouse gases, greenhouse gas emissions. So CO2 and methane primarily, these two, there are a few others, but these two are the sort of canonical. If you can deal with CO2, methane, then we're fine. Yeah. So this is a classic example of fetishization. Right? If you can deal with CO2, which is turned into a homogenized molecule. CO2 is CO2 is CO2 is CO2. Which of course is not correct. Yeah? Everyone who knows anything about biochemical and physical configuration knows that CO2 is not just CO2, it depends on how, where, what, how, and what sort of biochemical configurations it's involved, assembled in, etc. So it's predicated upon the homogenization The post-Kyoto protocol measures are precisely about that. The standard offsetting schemes, the carbon saving schemes, and is all about accounting for a molecule that is supposed to be commensurable. Now, the CO2 output in Split is the same as a CO2 captured in a forest in Brazil. It ain't. It is something very radically different. So the crisis has increasingly become articulated as a techno-managerial dispositif that is massively disputed. Go to any COP meeting and you have endless debates about technical institutional configurations. Those who want something radically different are left in the streets, literally, such as the climate justice activists. Which led Zizek to conclude the ecological condition is not really taken seriously. And despite the fact we know very well that the world is in serious ecological trouble, we continue to act as if we do not know. Who doesn't have one of those things? Who hasn't used their emails this week? Email traffic accounts for 2% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. You're going to stop emailing? Stop using smartphones? Do you know how much heat and energy is being generated to keep all your data on big boats, big Google boats in the Atlantic, in the Pacific actually? Yeah? Boats to cool down, the massive energy to store your videos and mine. We're all in this together. Are we taking this thing seriously? If we were to take the promise of catastrophe seriously, we would not be sitting here. We would not be sitting here. I would be constructing a lifeboat, as many actually are doing. Yeah? That's what the elites are precisely doing. So the conclusion of this is the consensual scripting of climate change is a clear and present danger shared across a wide ideological, economic, social spectrum, and its associated imaginaries, arguments, and policies reflects a particular, I would argue, process of populist depoliticization. It is our version of post-truth politics. So I don't want to hear a critique of Trump's post-truthism, which it is. I want us to think about our own version of post-truth politics. That's what I'm really concerned about. So all that has been unfolding in a context of more wide, broader depoliticization in the world, particularly in the global north. Europe is actually a prime example of that, and Eastern Europe's transition is the prime among primest of examples of this process of depoliticization. I mean, you're young enough to remember the great hopes of democratic politicization after the change. That was quickly dashed, was it not, right? Nonetheless, they're all democratic governments, democratically elected. No one would dispute that democracy as an institutional configuration, not perfect, not ideal, triumphed. Yeah. Nonetheless, we and most other people feel completely disempowered, feel have nothing to say. It's a bit odd, huh? So I think we should examine what we call today democratic institutional configuration, democracy today. It's not the same what it once was, and I don't want to go back there either, and certainly not what it might be. That's why I, together with many others now, call the present institutional configuration, political configuration, post-democratic. Post-democratic. Which is the result of a process of depoliticization over the past 30 or 40 years or so. I don't want to go into the analysis why that happened. I want to give a few characteristics of that post-democratic configuration. The kind of, for me, the root conditions through which we and many, many others feel so disempowered. That we can vote, etc. We live in democracies, yes, we feel completely disempowered, most people do. That's why they turn to populist, nationalist, xenophobic ones. That's one of the tactics of people who feel powerless to try to regain, in a post-truth way, a sense of power. So post-politicization or post-democratization is the process of the making of a consensual techno-managerial regime. A consensual techno-managerial regime that in itself cannot be disputed. Post-truth is in fact is imminent to the process, to the democratic condition today, in which the consensus is that there is no real alternative. Shall we have socialism instead of liberal capitalism? Shall we have communism? Or shall we have the apocalypse? We critique liberal capitalism and the institutional support structures, but the political names that existed, we don't want to hear about. Understandably so. And the other is a dystopian vision. So, post-democracy is characterized by a number of features. First one is what Roger Agambam called the cultivation of a permanent state of emergency. Take the ecological, the migration, the economic, financial crisis and conditions, or stage as terrorism, international terrorism, as emergencies. We, the elites, have to do something, and we have to do it now, and urgently. We don't have time to engage in democratic consultation, etc. We have to act now. It's a state of emergency. State of emergency is a war-type situation, of course, but it's now been elevated to a normal condition, invoked time after time after time again, and we, ecologists, mimic that too. The cultivation of a permanent state of emergency, which of course suspends democratic interaction and democratic consultation. Second is the economization of politics. By that I mean that consensually only those public choices are deemed reasonable that fit a market logic. Other public choices are deemed irrational, undesirable, unfeasible. For example, if I say in the UK, higher education should be free for all those who can and want to participate in higher education. They think I'm a dinosaur coming from the 20th century who has forgotten all about reality. There's not a public choice that can be publicly aired. That is what I mean by the economization of politics. So the sphere of public choice has been limited to what fits on an Excel Word spreadsheet, an accountancy sheet. Secondly, the strange thing is that the economy is depoliticized. That is the appropriation of nature, its transformation into usable goods, and the distribution of these usable goods to the various layers of society cannot be disputed, except on the margins. If I say nature should be a commons for all, they look at me, they come from another planet, except here, of course. Yeah. That cannot be aired as a reasonable, publicly debatable, yes, what used to be called the collectivization of the means of production. Yeah. Today we would call it turning nature, the soil of our subsistence, into a commons. That cannot be aired. Now, that configuration is sustained by expert managers. It's the experts that decide what is possible, what is not possible. I'm often called in, I'm an academic, as an expert, yeah, on urban planning, urban policy. That's what I do. I'm an urban sort of guy. Yeah. And then the EU calls me in, or the local authority calls me in and says, Swyngedouw, what should we do? I think, who am I to tell you? You know, listen to the people. You know, I'm just an academic. You know, I don't know more. No, I have a certain idea. But experts are the ones that legitimize the whole time what is possible and not possible, and that is done in the name of the people. That is not done in the name of a particular group, a class. It is in the name of everyone, and that makes it inherently populist. This is not an authoritarian regime. Post-democracy. No. In fact, it invites participation. Yeah. It is continuously legitimized by a call for participatory governance. Now, I am invited all the time to co-participate in decision-making about fucking everything. In Manchester and Amsterdam, where I live. The schools of my kids, the cultural conditions, the traffic condition, the green condition, the trade condition. I don't have the bloody time. I cannot, and I do not want to participate. I want democracy. I don't want to participate in decision-making. I'm an academic, I teach, and at night I make love or drink wine or something like that. Yeah, I don't want to go every day to another meeting to participate in how they're going to arrange my street. Right? Or the schools. You know, I choose some of those. Of course, we all do as activists. You know, we choose our little fetishes that we want to work with. And this tyranny of participation, as one of my colleagues in Amsterdam, in Manchester called it, is filled with unauthorized actors. Unauthorized actors, I mean illegitimate ones. Right? Because we do know that not everyone participates. You and I do. We go to the fucking meeting. Who are we? Who are we? The democracy is precisely about the voice of those who do not have a voice, who do not go to those meetings, who do not care, want to, have time, whatever, for whatever reasons, do not sitting around the table to discuss whatever is being discussed there. The NGOs, so the classic here, yeah? State, private sector, and NGOs, or beloved NGOs. Abolish, we should do them. They are a scandal of the democratic. A scandal of the democratic. They just sustain the post-democratic configuration. We should think about that. You don't have to agree with me, but you should think about it. And in these participatory governance circles, dispute is encouraged. Now, I can say whatever I want. My voice, my individual desires are welcomed. I'm actually invited to express them. What is not allowed is dissensus. That is, I want something radically different. I do not want to accept this frame. I don't want to have a market logic. I want socialism or eco-socialism. Look, oh, sorry, that we can't do. There's the door. Yeah? So that is what is being censored. Or as I put it, it's the ideological end of ideology. That ideological positions cannot any longer be aired in a legitimate sort of way. And that, of course, is itself a very ideologically the position. So we're not living in the end of ideology. We're living in the middle of it, but then in the name of the end of it. So that's what I mean also by the censoring of political signifiers, politicizing signifiers. I cannot go to a participatory meeting and say, well, hey, I'm a communist, what are we going to do? That I cannot say. I'm an anarchist, what are we going to do? Yeah? I can say, I'm a liberal, what are we going to do? Say, yeah, sit down, we'll talk, let's talk about it. That's what I mean by politicizing signifiers are censored. In the sense they are not seen as reasonable, as worthy of positioning and defending. That's what I mean by depoliticization. Okay, move on. I'm coming to the end slowly. What I now want to do is to articulate. So basically, I've done a simple thing. I've gone through the literature on populism. It's a bit convoluted, difficult, complex. There's no agreed academic, scientific definition of what populism is, but there are a set of agreed sort of characteristics. I've listed them. And I basically put the word climate or CO2 instead of migrants or something like that. So I want you to think about these statements as to the populist content, if it were to be uttered by Orbán or Trump with respect to the migrants. The first one is that climatic populism invokes the people. It's not humanity as a whole, both in a material and philosophical ways. Humanity is affected. It's a challenge for humanity. For everyone. Well, we do know it's not. It doesn't affect humanity as a whole. It doesn't affect some people at all. Some people actually benefit from it, as the Solon novel you brought out. Do you know how much money is being made in climate futures by financial speculators? Wow. Many of my students do that sort of stuff in the city of London. You know, I can buy a future or an option on climate and make a shitload of money on it. Shitload of money on it. You know, not to speak of the solar panel producers and the windmill producers and all the others, right? Or can you imagine when the Bering Sea will not freeze up any longer in the winter? There are already geopolitical battles, yes, who will be allowed to use this most important world trade route from China, the production space, to the consumption space of the Atlantic. Yeah, some benefit. And many get fucked. It's not about humanity at all. 2, climate populism cuts across ideological and social differences. It affects everyone. Whether you're a fascist, or a socialist, an eco-warrior, or a capitalist venture capitalist, in fact, us all. It's predicated as a common threat to both nature. It's not a threat to nature at all. Nature doesn't give a fuck. And humanity. It's based on the view that supposedly the people know best. Yeah? People are really worried about that. Yeah. We've put a lot of effort in making people worry about it. Now they're really worried about it. So because people worry about it, that we really have to do something about it. The climate has to be tackled. But who those people are remains empty, disembodied, vacuous. And therefore it has to be supported by an assumedly neutral scientific technocracy. Climate science is continuously invoked. And here's the third characteristic of populism. It's a short-circuiting that takes place between what Bruno Latour calls matters of fact and matters of concern. Yeah? So climate change are matters of fact. Right? What I read in the IPCC report are matters of fact. As scientific statements undisputable. And they may change over time, we're not 100% certain, etc., but they're facts. Then these same scientists say, and we should be really concerned about that. And I think, hold on. Right? There's a bit of a complex articulation needed between a matter of fact and a matter of concern. Let me exemplify that to the IPCC report again. In the last IPCC report, which for the first time included a report on the social consequences of climate change. We all applauded the IPCC for doing that. And it was very good, actually. It was very, very good. I'm not making critique of the IPCC per se, but the way in which science is mobilized and in which many scientists also see themselves. So in the executive report of the IPCC panel, it says, climate change is happening. Sure, I agree. It will affect the poor first and foremost. Well, that's pretty stupid as an argument, because that's precisely what poverty means, that you don't have the power to deal with the situation of facts. That's the definition of poverty, that you're being fucked when something happens. Yeah, I'm not poor, so something happens to me, take my credit card out, take me out of here. Yeah. And then third, worse. Therefore, we have to do something about climate change. Then I fall off my chair as an academic who has studied logic, had to study logic. Yeah? Climate, etc. This logic is only one of the possible logics. So a matter of concern is something that needs to be articulated, disputed and discussed. Is climate change such an issue? If we can bring 250 million Africans to Europe, we're fine. We're fine. But that cannot be aired, right? you have to do something about climate change. And it assumes, populism assumes, a direct relationship between people and political participation. I hear that here the whole time. We really have to deal with climate change by having a close relationship between politics, decision-making, and public participation. The radical democratic, as it ideally should be. Can anyone guarantee to me that a radical democratic communitarian perspective is not going to lead to radical exclusion of people? All our experiences of gated communities around the world, which are radical democratic communities, all of them, with immediately people decide what they're going to do in their communities, are massively exclusive. They radically, democratically decide to keep some people out. And there's nothing to guarantee to me that radical democracy or commons will not do that. That requires something more than democracy, although important it is. Climate change populism invokes apocalyptic futures. That is like the migration. If we keep migration going, man, Western civilization as we know it will disintegrate. Yeah. And disavows the real of actually existing combined and uneven catastrophe. The truth is disavowed. Most importantly for me is that the climate change argument has no privileged subject of change. Think of any politicizing process always has a privileged agent. For liberal capitalism is the creative entrepreneur. The risk-taking creative entrepreneur is the agent of change. For Marxism is the proletariat. The proletariat is the agent of social change in an emancipatory way. For feminism, it is woman, or the politicizing woman, that is the agent of change, that is the animator of the process of transformation. And each of those actually work. We have historical evidence of that. Where is the privileged subject of social change in the environmental climate? People of goodwill unite, are they Catholic sort of thing? The enemy is continuously externalized. While we do know from our social theory that some people produce most carbon to the dynamics of competition, growth, and capitalism. We know that, right? We know that. That's being repeated ad infinitum. And we all agree. And then we say, we have to do something about CO2. What the heck? This is a process of externalization of the enemy. Right? It's like saying, oh, we have a problem with unemployment. Right? It has nothing to do with the dynamics of capitalism and technological change and all. The rest of it is the migrant who's stealing our jobs. Exactly the same argument. Instruction. So the enemy becomes fetishized. It becomes a thing, not the relations through which that thing is constituted, which is capitalism, whatever you want to call it. It's a relationally constituted thing. So it becomes fetishized, a bit ambiguous. It's socially empty and homogenized. CO2 is CO2 is CO2. Without its social embodiment as a relational construct. So problems such as climate change are not the result of a fatal flaw inscribed in the system, but it's outside of it, and they're being externalized. That is why the solution, and think of the dominant liberal climate change policies, that the solution can be found in dealing with the pathological phenomena by mobilizing the mechanism that produced the problem to begin with. Yeah? We all know that it is capitalism that produces CO2, and the dominant way of dealing with it is to mobilize the same principles and mechanisms in order to cut the excess off. So the solution resides within the system itself. Climate activism, climate policies, not all, I'm generalizing a bit, become expressed in particular demands. So we have demands. Who are we demanding what from? Yeah. From the elites. From those who are supposedly in power. There's a demand addressed to the elites. Yeah? It's like migration populism. Yeah? Do something with the migrants, you fuckers. Yeah. Do something about CO2, you fuckers, because fucking up our life. Yeah. So it's a call on the elites not to change things fundamentally, but to undertake action. Weren't we all very happy when Obama signed the Kyoto Agreement? Yeah, finally, a decent, reasonable person. Yeah, did us a lot of good, did it not? Yeah, did a lot of good. So a non-populist politics is about transforming, obliterating the elites, and putting some other elite configuration in its place. Furthermore, as Badiou argues, no proper names are assigned to post-political or populist politics. It's associated, this process is associated with a politics of not naming, in the sense of giving a definite or proper name to its domain or field of action. To put it simple, we don't have a name of our desire. What do we want? And what do we call that thing we want? And let's stop talking about what we don't want. Capitalism, climate change, environmental destruction, social inequalities. I don't want to hear it anymore. I know what I do not want. We have to dare to symbolize what it is we want. Because all we have now are vague concepts like climate change policy, biodiversity policy, transition, sustainability, apocalypse, disaster, retrofitting, participation, etc. These are not political names. Liberalism is a political name. Do you want that? Communism is a political name. Do you want that back? Do you want to think of another name that symbolizes our collective desire, irrespective of my particular sort of sexual proclivities or yours, or cultural or color? Our common public desire, is a common, what's the name therefore? Do we dare to symbolize it? And ultimately, of course, populist tactics do not solve problems. It moves them around. It moves them around without fundamentally changing anything. Like, for example, the UK and other places, the nuclear option is revived in order to save the earth from overheating. Right? There's sun harvesting, offsetting, biofuels, geoengineering, geographical displacement, pollution, waste, COP meetings. All the rest of it moves it around. And a lot of energy of us is being vested in doing this. So, to conclude, what I try to do is to make us think about what politicizing the environment is all about. Not that I have the solution. Yeah? We have succeeded. So us together over the past 20, 30 years have succeeded in environmentalizing politics. It has become almost impossible to do policy making without the environment being disputed within that configuration. We've succeeded there. And that's quite an achievement. Quite an achievement. So we have environmentalized politics, like we've also, like feminists, succeeded in gendering politics. Not arguing that politics is gender sensitive, but it's gendered. It is. What about women? Yeah. What about women? What about the environment? Yeah. And that's legitimate. That's legitimate. Success. But what we need is to politicize the environment. That's the next step. First of all, I think we have to take seriously what I've called the Anthropocene promises. But that, I mean, is that we construct the world in human and non-human assemblages. There is no nature out there that needs to be saved or done or whatever with. We have to decide what sort of socio-physical assemblages constellations we want to construct. Who's going to do that? Who's going to decide it? Do we want those things as a social ecological assemblage, because that's what it is, yeah? Or not? And who's going to do it? And how? That's number one. We shouldn't do things in the name of a mythical nature that doesn't exist anymore. Secondly, you have to fully avow that the socio-ecological catastrophe is already here. Think about what you would do, think how you and I would act if we were to accept the truth that it's too late to stop runaway climate change. It is too late, in fact. Not that we should give up trying to think, but how would we fundamentally think about the political ecological organization if we were to argue there's nothing we can do anymore about the climate? What is it then we're going to do to make a socially just, ecologically sane and democratic configuration? What would that mean in the absence of the promise of an apocalypse that we want to avoid, but we know it's already there? How would we think? How would we act? What would we say? To whom and what? Third, we have to endorse what I would call the real of natures. The non-human is ultimately, we do it together, but we're not the same. Yeah? Natures do funny, funny things. It's whimsical, it's complex, it's non-linear. I'm using here scientific concepts from the natural sciences. It's partly unpredictable, it's contingent. We can never fully control it. It will always exceed. It will always be excessive. It will always do things we don't like. Yeah, we're not going to stop tsunamis. They're going to fuck up some people. Yeah? So nature will continue to be excessive. There is no truth, in other words, in nature. There are all sorts of different non-human things who do all sorts of things. What we have to decide is how can we negotiate with it, and what kind of natures do we want to nurture, and what kind of natures do we want to, if possible, annihilate from the surface of the earth. Let me give you an example. Biodiversity. Who's against biodiversity? No one? I know. So let's think of the HIV virus, which finds a perfectly wonderful ecological symbiosis in the bodies of primarily sub-Saharan men and women. Yeah. Should we nurture these bodies so that the HIV virus can sustain itself over time, since God knows what the DNA sequence of the HIV virus might give us in the future that we don't know yet? Or should we eradicate that nature from the surface of the earth? That's a political choice that cannot be legitimated in the name of nature. Only be legitimate in terms of choice, political choices that you and I as human beings make or not make. So the most important thing here is that we have to delegitimize nature or God or philosophy or science as legitimizing ground for the political. There is nothing in science to tell us what to do and what to do. There's nothing in philosophy that will tell us what to do, or not to do. There is no God after that of God who will tell us what is good or not good, what is right or wrong. And there is nothing in nature to tell us what to do or not to do. We have to take the courage to decide for ourselves and fight for it. And there's no ground to stand on. There's no ground to stand on. That's why I define the political as the moment of staging of equality by those who have no fucking other choice than doing so. And those are the ones we should join up with. And that includes, or is predicated upon, reclaiming the democratic political, which I distinguish from democratic institutions. They are articulated in radical or otherwise democratic institutions, but the democratic yet political as the opening up continuation of spaces where those who are being dominated, being wrong, can stage equality that we can link up with. That opens up processes of politicization, not us saying this has to be done and that has to be done in the name of justice and climate. Who the fuck are we? So they're claiming the democratic, political, there's the presumption of equality, not justice, equality of each and everyone, as the condition of possibility for the inauguration of different new socio-ecological assemblages. This is what we say we want. And we have to consider here for the degrowthers among you. Degrowth is not a desire. Degrowth is a consequence of our politics. Yeah. And democratization and radical equality for everyone who's ever tried to experiment with democratic exchanges. They're slow, or they're not. They're difficult, or they're not. Decisions are very difficult. They're long, tedious, and really slow. Yeah. That's why capitalist economy can't deal with the democratic. Things have to be fast, etc. So real democratization, that's real serious, will slow down things massively. Massively. And that would lead to degrowth, not the other way around. So my final sentence is to many, many activists, as we are, and I have to remind myself of that the whole time. Stop acting hysterically. Most of us are hysterics. We should stop doing what we're doing and take pause. That's what we're doing here. So we should stop acting hysterically and start to think again. Of course, that's what an academic would say at the end of the thing. We have to start thinking again about what it is we do, and more importantly, what it is we want. Because I know what we do not want. I thank you very much, and I'm sorry it took so long.
We can take several questions before the break. Paul?
Yeah, I don't know whether this is going to be a question, Erik. The first thing to say is that I don't know what I've just participated in. but three things come to mind. One is a 1.5 hour expose, rant, deconstruction of lots of certainties that people are in room with, and therefore that's really useful. I've also witnessed, I think, a stand-up comedy show in which there were some brilliant one-liners which are worth repeating. And I think I've witnessed, I mean, therapy sessions take 50 minutes, so this was 2 50-minute therapy sessions, right? So I just want to kind of put 2 thoughts out there. The first is the last slide, because you were doing really well with that last slide. But then you did 2 things, which was, what we want is socially just, democratic, and environmentally sane. So you have sanity as an unproblematic concept. And then we should stop acting hysterically. So you've got hysteria as an unproblematic concept. Now both of those are psychoanalytic, managerial, technocratic, post-political, anti-feminist, anti-madness concepts, right? Perhaps. So one might need to continue the interrogation in a sense about what it is that we want, because sanity against hysteria isn't something I'm going to sign up to, right? But the second point is we need to start thinking again. And there was a moment in the lecture where I kind of thought, actually, you know, when you said, liberals invite us to participatory meetings, and I say I'm an eco-socialist, so they show you the door. When they show you the door, you get angry, right? You get angry, there's emotions, but it's all right because you can come to the Green Academy on the beautiful island of Vis, and our anger will be kind of toned down.
Indeed.
And I just wondered whether really we are also then part of the problem by exactly that.
Yes. So on the last thing, very quickly, what we all do, what we all share, we're all a bit neurotic. So I think madness is everyday normality. And there are different types of neuroses, obsessives, hysterics, etc. Historically gendered, they're not any longer. What is the basis of that? Is that we pursue our desire. That's what both share. Yeah. Any kind of basic psychoanalytic thing. So what we do is to try to pursue our desire. So we are here because we desire to be here. We desire to be here. Is this particularly enjoyable? Yeah, in a certain perverse way. Yeah, but the weather is nice. I had to leave my partner behind. I could have been swimming with her. I said that would be really enjoyable. But no, I came here. I desire. Same holds true for you. Same holds true for Bill Gates or etc. Desire. Now, that is either obsessive and hysterical. What we cannot, that's what I was trying to call for, is enjoyment. Enjoyment. If you know what we call sex or love, that can be enjoyable. What would be political enjoyment? And how to get there? What to pursue desires. So that's a bit of a challenge. We're neurotic. And that's what we keep on doing, what we're doing. So the worst thing that could happen to us, our time here, is that tomorrow a socially just, ecologically sane, and democratic order would be constituted, miraculously. We would be so frustrated. What would we do next? What would we do next? But that's what we say. But no, we would be desperately finding some sort of cause to keep our desire alive. And I don't have an answer to many of the questions that you raised. I just wanted to think. Anyway.
Tell you a little bit. I mean, Paul Gilroy said that angry mobs, people in angry mobs have enjoyment.
Oh yes, of course. As we all know, we've all participated in angry mobs, I hope. Throwing a stone or two to police.
The point you made about which is the agent of change in the subject is very important. Of course, when we look back, it was in 20th century easy, the factory worker and other activists.
Yes.
And I agree that now it's we cannot define anymore, but it's not only a problem for, let's say, the ecologists.
No.
It's a common problem for all emancipatory movements.
Correct.
So,
I agree with
if, from your point of view, what would be your agent of change?
Yeah. Yes. I fully agree with your diagnosis and a good question. In my book, I make a case. Don't know whether I'm right. Of who I perceive potentially as agents of emancipatory progressive change. And I've latched on a bit on what I call the miraculous few years between 2010 and 2014, which for me were in many ways miraculous. Because the emancipatory desire became suddenly, it's always latently there, became suddenly directly expressed in an unmediated way. I'm talking about the Arab Spring. That's how it started, Tunis, Cairo, Arab Spring. Quickly jumped to Europe, Greece, the outraged, the indignados in Spain, the Occupy movement in the Anglo-Saxon and elsewhere, the umbrella movement in Hong Kong, Gezi Park, just to name a few. The list is endless. This is the moment that those who do not count stand up and say, I want to count it equally. So in those moments I discern the making of potential political subjectivities of emancipatory change. Now what is interesting about them is that their social positionality is radically heterogeneous. So if you look at the social composition of those who put their bodies physically on the line, they cut through identitarian positions, the men and women. Christians, in the case of Turkey or the Middle East, Christians, Muslims, all manner with heterogeneous sexual identities, etc., coming together in a public sphere to demand democratization and equality. So that's where I see.
Then, if I may use the vision, between rebellion and revolution.
Well,
the question is, I agree that there were energy rebellion,
yes.
but I lack a kind of because of course
Indeed.
this obsession with horizontality.
Indeed.
And like sometimes kind of vision of the future.
I fully agree. I can't agree more, and in the book I try to explore that too. These were, we know now by hindsight, carnivalesque Bakhtinian outbursts that expressed nonetheless that emancipatory desire and failed, possibly with the exception of Greece, Syriza, Spain, Podemos, arguably, different sort of, but failed to politicize. That is taking that enthusiasm, which cannot be sustained. You know, can't occupy things forever. You don't want to go back home, you know? Drink some wine, talk to your friends, make love to your lover, whatever. You can't occupy things the whole time. That's necessarily short-lived. It's intense, it's pleasurable, it's mind-blowing, right? Then the long, difficult process of politicization, you know? They come together, become a militant of the cause that became expressed in that event. That was missing in most cases. But I would argue that's precisely where we should think about politicization. Which is therefore the opposite of saying, well, I think this has to be done, I'm going to organize a party to do that. Yeah, that's 19th century sort of. The opposite has to happen, is to join up with those insurgencies, rebellions, which they are, no more and no less, insurgencies, rebellions, and turn them into politicization, which of course aimed at capturing and transforming the state, ultimately. So that's where I discern. I may be wrong about these new subjects of change. It's not any longer the proletariat or a woman, that's not going to work. It's something else, and we don't know really, so we're all desperately trying to link up, see possibilities, and this is mine.
One question, and then we take a break.
I don't have a question, it's a comment. Thank you for a very inspiring lecture, and just I realize now that maybe somebody else agrees with me, we're not, maybe I'm too late with this realization, but we're already doomed, so we're going to die. And for me, this is a very not me, humanity, whatever this means. For me, this is a very comforting thought. We're not fighting for saving the planet. We're fighting for the death of the planet as respectfully, as socially just as possible. For me, this is very comforting. For me, this means a passionate fight, a militant fight, with a definitive goal that the Earth is going to stop this.
But isn't it not the other way around? Isn't it the case that you and I are going to die, and me sooner than you, I hope? It's not the Earth to die. Earth will continue. Earth will continue forever. We should take seriously the fact that you and I are going to die.
Absolutely. This is what I have in my personal life. When I think about that, it's a comforting thought that doesn't make me passive. I'm going to die and I have a comfortable life, so fuck everything. This makes me an activist. So, because I have a comfortable life and I will have a comfortable death, but other people, other animals may not have the same chance to die comfortably, socially just. Maybe, because it was a bit of a depressing lecture, I must say. So maybe if we start thinking about our goal being death, being comfortable, a comfortable thought, like comforting thought. I don't know.
Thank you very much. It was a brilliant presentation, and it reminds me for what we tried to do with the French degrowth movement in the last 10 years, try to repoliticize debates where we saw they were always more and more depoliticized. And the last step nowadays in France is really the birth of this collapsology, which is everywhere in the media, but it's a great way to not to speak about what I call degrowth, not to speak about how to repoliticize it. And one of the key words in particular when I listen to who I think are real ideological enemies, the transhumanists, the technoscientists, the technocracy and everything. One of the key question behind it's our relationship toward death. And how do we reappropriate politically death? And I think, in fact, collapse started when we entered into this thermo-industrial civilization. Like death starts as soon as you get birth, which is the case for everything. And how to politically question that?
Yes, that's a very good question, a very difficult one. To be honest, I'm trying to write an Anthropocene around this. But one of the theories, this does not come from me, this comes from Roberto Esposito, Italian philosopher, and Pierre de Brossard, French political scientist. They talk about immunitary democracy. It's a very interesting, again, similarity between the environmental argument and the populist migration argument. Yeah? What is it we demand? Whether it's us, ecologists, or them, xenophobic populist nationalists, is that we invoke some sort of institutional configuration that will assure that we can continue living forever. Yeah? So that's what Esposito calls an immunitary biopolitics, which Brossard has translated into what he calls the make of an immunitary state. So we expect, we demand, we do that, and our worst enemies too, demand that there is an institutional configuration that immunologizes us, that keeps us healthy, happy, and safe, so that life as we know it can continue in eternity. So an immunitary logic is predicated upon a disavowal of death, of determination. Therefore, politicizing death would be a very interesting, good step. Yeah? Politicizing our death, not the death of the planet, which will not happen. Right? So this immunitary logic, isn't that what drives so much of the ecological and environmental conditions? Understand that, oh, life is going to terminate. Yeah? Let's find an institutional configuration, a set of technologies and experts, etc., who will install things such that life for me and everyone else can continue inevitably, indefinitely. And of course, the populist migration can make exactly the same point. Exactly the same point. It's an immunitary logic that both of us share. Those who want to have a really good, equal, inclusive, equal democratic world, and those who will resist that. I am concerned with the similarities that I find between these two tactics or ways of acting, the similarities between the two, and how we can cut through that deadlock. I have no simple answer to that, but yeah, that's. Yeah, and I wouldn't blame the experts too much. We, of course, need experts. Yeah? Yeah? If I'm ill, I'm going to see a doctor and not some sort of voodoo person, right? When my water mains, when the almost last drop doesn't come out of my water drains, I'm going to call an engineer, right? Yeah? I'm not going to dabble with it myself. So experts, there's nothing wrong with experts. We should not make experts decide our fate. That's a different story. Now let experts be experts. Let's not make them decide what is possible and what is not possible, what we should or should not do. Right? That's a political debate.
Okay, thank you all. We'll take a short break, about 15 minutes, and then come back for second 2 lectures more. So please come back after 15 minutes. Thank you.